But Sharon said, fine, you want to go to Iraq? Great, we want you to go to Iraq, but we insist that you go to Iran next. Then they say they got mid-range missiles that can hit Israel. Well, that sounds like a problem for the sovereign independent nation state of Israel to me. What does that have to do with the United States of America? Nothing. Oh, just abolish the empire. Just come home. We don't need a world empire at all. Bring home all the troops. It's just the obvious thing, and it's really the greatest tragedy that the American people did not nominate and elect Ron Paul for president back in 2008 and 2012 when they could have, because that was the return to normalcy that we needed. That was abandon the empire and be a constitutional republic. But when you have the likes of the Bushes and the Clintons and Joe Biden and John McCain, and they are the stewards of the liberal center, and they do nothing but run the country straight into the ground with all this imperialism and all this corruption and all this overspending. I mean, for example, right now, even with all the hype about it, only 40% of Republicans support attacking Iran. Just this century, if we had not been engaged in all this idiot militarism in this century, what difference that would have made for this society. You know, pay down that national debt instead of the interest on the debt costing more than the empire itself every year. They don't have nuclear weapons. And so America is now, at Netanyahu's insistence, trying to tell the Iranians, you either give up all your missile deterrent so Israel can attack you in a few months from now, or we'll attack you now. I mean, 8 wars in a row that we should not have done at all. That's quite a record.
Hi everyone, today I have one of those guests who make you feel like you're playing checkers while he's playing chess, the kind who reminds you how little you know about US foreign policy. Scott Horton is someone who has survived debating clueless or confident people on Piers Morgan. He's also the director of Scott Horton Academy of Foreign Policy and Freedom, director of the Libertarian Institute, and the host of Scott Horton Show, and co-host of Provoked with historian Darryl Cooper. Scott has authored several books including Provoked, How Washington Started the New Cold War with Russia, and the Catastrophe in Ukraine, Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, and Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism. He is widely recognized for his principled anti-war perspective and deep research into US interventionism. So without further ado, the man who thinks sleep is optional, Scott Horton. Great to be talking to you. How are you?
Thank you very much. It's great to be with you here.
So how's your day been? You were saying it's okay. Long day for you?
Yes, always. But doing okay.
That's good. That's good. So what keeps you busy these days besides appearing on Piers Morgan and debating people, let's say hard-headed people who are pro-war?
I'm spending a lot of my time now trying to record the audiobook for Provoked. I had to put it on hold while I was creating the Academy. So I have the first 3 parts are out, H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton. And I'm done recording W. Bush, Obama, and I'm almost done recording Trump, but I still have to edit all that. And then I still have to finish recording Biden and the rest of the book. And I'm in a real hurry now to try to get that done. And then, of course, working on the Academy, too. I have the second half of my Cold War course is still in edit. So once I'm done with that, then, you know, I'll be done fighting the last war and I can try to catch up with what's going on right now.
Right. So how long do you think you have to go before you finish the audio recording?
Well, I don't know about like before I can finish editing and producing it, but the audio, I'm determined to get finished recording in the next couple of weeks here. I just absolutely have to knock it out. It's the worst job in the world. It sounds easy, right? Read your own book out loud. Oh, it's the absolute worst. I would rather, you know, work down at the sewer company, or, you know, the city sewage water treatment, like in the bad section. It's just the worst, most tedious work in the world. Seriously, it's just terrible.
How is it?
I've been a roofer
because you're reading your own work?
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare. Now I couldn't have anyone else do it, right? They're not going to do it right. It's got to be me, but I just hate it. It sounds easy, but it's totally not. It's the worst.
Would be funny if you asked Bill Kristol to do it. You debated him in 2021, I guess, on Reason TV. But that didn't go well.
Wouldn't that be funny if those were the stakes? You have to read my audiobook.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I don't know if anybody would want to buy it though if it was Bill Kristol reading the thing. They wouldn't
No,
believe it. He'd undermine my whole thing. Or actually, it might be really funny when he's forced to read the parts about him. They're like, hey.
yeah. And it was funny in that debate, happened probably 4 or 5 years ago. He was adamantly saying that the United States is spreading democracy around the world. And then you brought up Bahrain, Qatar, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, all these countries. And he had no answer to that. I just find it really, really interesting. People are just so strong-headed in their beliefs.
Yeah. Well, and, Bill Kristol is a great example. I mean, he's his own thing, but he's also a great stereotype of a neocon in the sense that, in fact, there's even a book by a guy named Jacob Hellbrun called They Knew They Were Right, which like sums up everything, right? They were not right at all, but they knew they were, though. And that debate is it's great because it's just, I did okay, but he did terrible, right? When it came to having to be able to defend, his own role in any of this or the results of any of these interventions, he just couldn't do it. And you could tell that the only opposition that he's used to ever having to deal with would be like a Code Pink lady with painted red hands screaming war criminal in his face or whatever. And then he can just be like, yeah, whatever, lady, and sort of ignore that, right? But if you look at the only times he ever went up against anybody who knew what they were talking about, he got his ass whooped. And that's me, John Pilger, and Daniel Ellsberg. Daniel Ellsberg debated him on C-SPAN Washington Journal in the run-up to Iraq War II. And he didn't know anything. Daniel Ellsberg just ran circles around him. Just made him look like an absolute fool. And then the same thing for John Pilger. Right around the same time, John Pilger interviewed him. And just, like, what's the difference between John Pilger and another interviewer or another journalist? He knows what he's talking about, right? He's got a chip on his shoulder and he's done his research. I mean, he was a little bit sloppy sometimes, but he definitely got the better of Kristol in that thing by far. And I knew it was going to be like that. The debate originally got delayed because of COVID. So I had a year and a half before knowing the debate was going to happen, but then it was a year and a half before it ever happened. In fact, it was 2 years before it ever happened. It was a year and a half after it was supposed to happen. It got hugely delayed. So I had a lot of time to think about, oh my God, I got to debate Bill Kristol. I got this Bill Kristol debate coming up. It really caused a lot of anxiety because I'm like, oh man, I don't know what's going to happen, but I better win because if I don't, then that's like the war party wins and the peace guy lost. That's really bad. You know what I mean? So I have to do a good job. But then I knew going into it, people would ask me, so you're going to debate Bill Kristol? You think he's getting ready for you? And like, you think he's researching you and reading your books and stuff? And I always just say, no, I know he's not. He's such an arrogant jerk. He knows he's right. Why would he have to look into what I have to say? You know what I mean? Where I'm like, oh man, I wonder what he might say to get the better of me. I better like be totally bulletproof. He doesn't care. He knows he's right. So what does he do? He gets out there and he goes, well, all we do is spread democracy. And then when I go, yeah, see the following 19 exceptions, he goes, huh. Or when he says, well, we have kept the peace in the world for the last 75 years. I go, yeah, except for all the wars that we started. Like a lot of them, and killed millions of people. All he means is that Germany and France haven't fought, right? That Britain and Russia haven't fought with, Germany in the middle having to choose sides and whatever. That's what he's talking about. But tell that to the Koreans and the Vietnamese and the Laotians and the Cambodians and the Iraqis and the Guatemalans and whoever. You know what I mean? America brought absolute chaos to them, but he never even stopped to think of it that way. So he wouldn't even build in a caveat. Now, I know we did have some proxy wars with the Soviet Union, but by and large, we kept the peace, especially in Europe. Now, at least you're being honest, right? But he's not honest, and he doesn't even have an honest argument. So he's just like, there hasn't been a war in 75 years, all because of us. Thanks to us, we prevented war from breaking out anywhere. It's the most peace that's ever been had. I'm like, no. And then he looked like a fool going up against someone who could just name a few,
That's true. I think, but the sad thing is that war rhetoric is still going on. So Netanyahu was just in America. I think he's left now. I'm not sure what the outcome of the meeting of him with Trump was, but Trump put out a tweet What do you make of all of that? Is there going to be an attack on Iran anytime soon, or is Trump
Yes,
holding
I'm
back?
afraid that there is. I'm willing to bet that there is. I'm not really a prediction guy. I'm really better at telling you what already happened. Um, and I don't know. I mean, listen, we have no good reason for war. So how's that for a good reason to not have one? You know what I mean? It's insane to think that we would have one. I mean, the fact that it's like a matter of guesswork. Is America going to launch another Pearl Harbor style surprise sneak attack to launch another dastardly, disastrous, aggressive war? I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine, pal, because it doesn't come down to Congress voting on it because they asked us what we think. It comes down to the whim of the president. And as you said, based on his negotiation, not with the American people, not with the American Congress, with the Prime Minister of Israel, of whether we're going to do this for them. And by the way, it's been like this. You know, there's a great picture of Netanyahu came to town. There he is sitting down with Witkoff and Kushner, laying down the law. Here's what the negotiations have to be. This is sort of his pre-negotiation with them before he talks with Trump. That you can't just get restrictions on the nuclear program. No, no, no. They have to end all support for Hezbollah and the Houthis. They have to destroy all of their own mid-range missiles and their entire conventional deterrent. And they, in other words, adding all of these restrictions that are impossible, right? That are poison pills that are meant to be rejected so that they have an excuse for war. And I was kind of joking on the Twitter there and tweeted out that picture of him meeting with Kushner and Witkoff, and clearly, explaining in declarative sentences what it is that he wants there. And I just said, man, I really wish they had been this open about it in 2003, because this is exactly how they got us into Iraq, too. Netanyahu coming to town, whipping all of his neoconservatives, who were essentially all of them acting as agents of influence for Israel, as synonyms for Israel. And he came and he told them, this is what we want and this is what we're going to do. And it's funny because people say Ariel Sharon was the prime minister and he didn't want to attack Iraq. Well, that's not true. He was prime minister. And it is true that Netanyahu was more of an Iraq hawk than he was. But two things about that. First of all, the neocons in America were closer to Netanyahu than they were Sharon, even though they were both in the same Likud party, and Sharon was actually prime minister at the time. They were still all Netanyahu guys, especially Wormser and Pearl and all those guys. They agreed with Netanyahu that they hated Saddam more than the Ayatollah, whereas Sharon tended to hate the Ayatollah more. But Sharon said, fine, you want to go to Iraq? Great, we want you to go to Iraq, but we insist that you go to Errand next. And we insist that you also get rid of Hezbollah and Gaddafi and, Nasrallah in Lebanon, Gaddafi in Libya. But especially, you can't overlook regime change in Tehran, because Sharon at least was smart enough to realize if you just overthrow Saddam Hussein, you're going to empower Iran rather than empowering the Iraqi Shiites over Iran like the idiot neoconservatives believed. And Sharon was right about that. But he still supported the war, and he still had his own men make up fake intelligence in English that they funneled into the pipeline to lie us into war. And they absolutely, Sharon and his men absolutely played a role in that, even though it is true that Netanyahu is the one who wanted to go. And by the way, George W. Bush wanted to go to Baghdad, not Tehran. So convenient that the neocons and Netanyahu agreed with that, which is what the president already wanted to do anyway. And then the question was, well, can we get him to go to Tehran too? And they ended up failing in that then, but looks like they very well may get their wish now. However, here's the thing. One, we got no good reason to do it. Okay, they're not making nuclear weapons, and that wouldn't be a good enough reason to attack them anyway. Yes, they supported the militia that blew up American Marines, 241 of them in 1983, but that's not a good enough reason to go to war against them anyway. People say that they killed 600 Americans in Iraq War II. Well, that's just a lie. Those are Iraqi Shiites who laid those landmines that they made that did not come from Iran. I debunk all that in my book, but the claim in the spring of 2007 was Iran supplied a bomb every time a Shiite set one off. That just wasn't true. It was the local Iraqis, and it was America who picked a fight against their own guy, Muqtada al-Sadr, who, in fact, they fought the whole war for, and is one of the major kingmakers in that country as a result of America's war to this day. They picked that fight with him, trying to come up with an excuse to take strikes inside Iran, which Bush ended up deciding against and not letting him do. But So there's another reason that's not good enough to attack them. Then they say they got mid-range missiles that can hit Israel. Well, that sounds like a problem for the sovereign independent nation state of Israel to me. What does that have to do with the United States of America? Nothing. And they just pretend like that's some kind of red line that I have to enforce or our country has to enforce against them. Is completely crazy. That's not our responsibility at all. And of course, that's Iran's only deterrent against nuclear-armed Israel. They don't have nuclear weapons. And so America's now, at Netanyahu's insistence, trying to tell the Iranians, you either give up all your missile deterrent so Israel can attack you in a few months from now, or we'll attack you now. Well, they're going to choose war if that's the ultimatum, is that no matter what, they get war. Only this way, at least, they get to try to fight back. Then there's the question of how hard they'll fight back. And we got still thousands of troops in Iraq, as well as in Kuwait, army soldiers and special operations forces, especially in Iraq. In Qatar, we have the giant Al Udeid Air Base, which is Central Command headquarters, a giant air base, and that's a British air base as well. And then in Qatar, in Bahrain, we have a giant naval base, the headquarters of the Fifth Fleet. And then we have army bases in Saudi Arabia and Air Force bases in Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Oman as well. And so all of those are at risk, at least, of Iranian missiles. Now, last June, when Donald Trump bombed the Ayatollah, he launched a symbolic strike. We dropped 14 bombs. He fired 14 rockets. He called ahead of time, said, shoot him down if you want. I got to save some face here. I'm firing off some rockets. There are rumors, even from Iran, actually coming out of Iran, that they had a deal beforehand. We're going to drop 14 bombs. You guys can fire 14 missiles. And they even arranged it beforehand. But you better not hit us harder than that. You're going to make me mad, right? And then they didn't. The Ayatollah didn't dare. He was in the middle of, firing a massive missile volley at Israel. But he didn't dare take on Donald Trump, dude. He knows Donald Trump is loco. He knows that he doesn't. He knows what is possible, the firepower at Donald Trump's disposal if he was to get emotional, right? And so from the Ayatollah's point of view, at least when we're bombing their nuclear program, which is a vital interest to theirs, the Ayatollah said, what are you going to do, man? And he backed down. Now, in this case, the point is regime change. We're that would be the plan, would be not just like to degrade their missiles or something. I mean, I guess that's one option, would be to just try to bomb their missiles before they can use them, try to cripple their regime in some way without, explicitly just assassinating the Ayatollah. But they say they want a regime change, but they don't have anyone to replace the current regime with. And the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, admitted that under oath. We don't have anyone to put in power. In other words, they know that if they tried to parachute in the monarchists, the people would not support them. So they really have no good options. You can't do a regime change from the air unless you're talking about you're going to absolutely decimate Iranian government and military targets, just decimate them, and then try to parachute in the monarchy and claim sovereignty somehow. But they don't have an armed force that could possibly guarantee the rule of a new power there. It's just never going to work. And so, they're right up against Netanyahu's impossible demands and America's, ultimate inability to enforce them without committing to violent action far beyond what Donald Trump is really willing to do. Or at least, I hope that's right. It's clear that he would be at least somewhat reluctant to commit to something like that. From Donald Trump's point of view, making some big explosions and claiming a big victory is one thing. But to him, the idea of repeating W. Bush's folly and trying to send in the 3rd Infantry Division, send in the 82nd Airborne and the Marine Corps, that's a nightmare, a bazillion dollar, just absolute, presidency destroying nightmare. And so he'd be crazy to do it, man. He's got no good reason to do it. The only good reason to do it is to get Netanyahu to shut up and spare him a hole in his eardrum. That's it. But the cost to the United States and to all of our allies could be extraordinary. And there's very little reason to think that whatever new situation came about in Iran as the result of a full-scale regime change war of some kind, where they actually did decapitate, kill the Ayatollah and his ruling council of mullahs and whatever, there's virtually no reason in the world to think that the result of that would be an improvement for the people of Iran, the people of the region, or anything else.
So I think you mentioned the endgame could be the regime change in Iran, but the rhetoric that comes out of Israel and America is that Iran is the biggest destabilizing force in the Middle East. Do American public also think like that?
Well, I'm not sure. And the American public's point of view doesn't really matter in this, very much. I think probably if you asked anybody, if you isolated and said, well, really, it's Bush and Obama turned the Middle East upside down, right? Everybody would admit that. W. Bush handed Baghdad to Tehran. It wasn't Iran that invaded Iraq in 2003. That was little old us that did that. So pretty hard to ignore that. You know what I mean? For people who know what they're talking about at all, of course, America and Saudi Arabia are the greatest backers of terrorism in the world. And they're the ones who support the bin Ladenites, even after al-Qaeda has killed Americans by the thousands, our civilians at home and our military men abroad. But the Israelis hate the Shiites more. The Israelis, and by the way, the Israelis have used Iran as a cudgel to kind of get the rest of the Sunni regimes in the region to fall in with them, either officially through the Abraham Accords or at least kind of unofficially, like they're doing with Saudi Arabia, kind of building this closer alliance, because they have the Shiite menace to confront, right, and to contain. But if they finish a regime change, if they succeed in killing Khamenei and, driving whatever Tehran either into chaos or whatever, somehow reestablishing the monarchy that's going to do whatever they want or whatever, well then, yeah, it sounds like they could very well deprive all those Sunni kingdoms of a good incentive to do what they want, right? If the power balance is shifted that far away from Persia, then who does it shift to? Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and then, maybe Iraq to a degree. And then what do they do with their power? Maybe we'll cause a new war there between, Shiite Iraq and Saudi Arabia over dominance, or maybe we'll cause a new conflict, whatever, however it breaks out. And, even in the Gulf, there are vast differences and rivalries between Saudi and UAE and Qatar, for example, right? Where sometimes Saudi and UAE gang up on Qatar, but other times Saudi and UAE are at each other's throats so bad that it's all just a free-for-all over there. So, without the big bad Ayatollah, Shiite menace to the east, that could change the entire balance of power in the region, as, all the others then vie for their position in the region, plus also for their position in America's dominated order over there. Because then, that would be another major beneficiary, I guess, of the power shift would be to the United States. Potentially, if they were able to at least neutralize Iran, if not actually install someone to their liking there. But I think ultimately a great cost, right? I don't think America has really much to gain there compared to the risk, but I think it could jeopardize Israel's position. Netanyahu's whole thing is what he called the new Middle East. It is predicated on being able to tame all the Sunni kings without having to give in to the Palestinians at all. No equal rights, no citizenship, no independence, no nothing. They lose. Israel gets everything, and they still get to deal with the Sunni kings. Whereas before, they had all promised to never normalize relations with Israel until the Palestinians got a fair deal first. And in Trump's first term, basically, they just figured out how much we have to bribe them to get them to go along with these Abraham Accords and stuff. So, it could upset all that they've accomplished. In fact, right? If the Israelis get the real checkmate and win the game, well, then they start a brand new game. And so things could shake out, quite against their interest. We don't know. And really, if it's a full-scale war to kill the Ayatollah and overthrow the revolution, well, for all I know, the Ayatollah Sistani will declare that anyone who believes in God better go to war with America. right? You could have a full Shiite jihad against the United States that we have not had this whole time. We've been fighting only the Sunni bin Ladenites. But if they kill Khamenei, I don't know what Sistani's going to say about that. Sistani, he's the highest ranking religious, Shiite cleric in the world, lives there in Najaf in Iraq. And he's the guy who really upended W. Bush's plan in Iraq in January of 2004. After America, almost a year into the war, Sistani said, listen, if you believe in God, I want you to go outside and tell George W. Bush you want a one-man, one-vote democracy, or else is he feeling lucky and want to start this war all over again. And so every last Shiite from Najaf to Basra to East Baghdad went outside and said, hey, Bush, you want to start the war over again? And Bush got down on his knees and said no, and became the Ayatollah Sistani's slave for the rest of his presidency. Simple as that. Otherwise, he would have had to admit defeat and just leave, and he wasn't willing to do that. So he continued to carry out the Ayatollah's dirty work for the rest of the damn war, right? Because he couldn't admit that he was wrong. But it goes to show Sistani's willingness to make tough decisions. And man, in the event of a full-scale war to destroy the Iranian Revolution, I don't know what they might do, but there's a supermajority Shiite population in Bahrain under a Sunni king. There's Shiite friends of the Iranians, not exactly their sock puppets, but their allies and friends in the Houthi regime in Yemen now. And then, of course, there's what's left of Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. And I think probably quite unlike Al-Qaeda and ISIS, I think Hezbollah probably does have a pretty severe presence across Europe and even in Latin America and so forth. Now, I've been told by a real expert, Larry Johnson, that Hezbollah's presence in Latin America is just making money. They're not doing terrorism down there. This is the financing arm of their operation and all that. But if we're going to full-scale jihad, holy war type thing, then that could very well change. And those guys could turn into de facto sleeper cells, basically. And who knows, whatever, Shiite Arabs or Persians or whoever that already live in the United States as well could be de facto like sleeper cells. And decide and think about that, where we've been at war against these bin Ladenites this whole time, now taking on their worst enemies full scale as well, lead to a hell of a crisis. And look, last June, it was like best case scenario for an aggressive war. They bombed the nuclear program for 2 weeks and then they stopped and the whole thing was over. Now, they didn't solve their problem, but it didn't devolve into global chaos either, right? So like, I don't know, man. I don't know what's going to happen, but I would say, people should understand we have no excuse to do this whatsoever. Iran is not threatening us. You can't bring up 1983 and they helped a group of Lebanese kill our Marines there when Ronald Reagan was selling them missiles just a couple of years after that. Maybe even that same year or next year after that, he was selling them missiles. While he's back in Saddam Hussein, he was selling missiles to the Ayatollah too, back in both sides of that war. So if that wasn't a reason for Ronald Reagan to bomb Tehran, then there's no way in the world that now 40 years later, 43, it'd be a good enough reason for us to bomb them. It's just nonsense, right? Like we have no casus belli here. And there are massive and easily foreseeable potential consequences from doing this too. There's just no way in the world anyone should be supporting this right now.
Yeah, I think there's no military solution to this. There's only a political solution, negotiations. But I'm not sure whether Israel is going to go with that because, like you mentioned, let's say, Iran is a different beast altogether. They've got like more than 93 million people. It's a really big country. The terrain is really difficult as well. Yep. It's not going to be an easy cakewalk like Iraq was. It's going to be really difficult for anybody to try to tame Iran. And then,
and Iraq was not easy.
Yeah, correct. Iraq wasn't easy as well. No matter
this
how
would be
much.
Way worse. Yep.
Yeah, please go on. Yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say, yeah, you're totally right. Which, by the way, nobody's talking about putting ground troops in there, but that just goes to show then they have no solution. They can start a war, but they can't end it. They have no way to say, okay, well, as Petraeus was famously quoted as saying when they invaded Iraq, tell me how this ends. Well, in that case, it ended with Petraeus building the Iraqi Bada Brigade, the Supreme Islamic Council's Bada Brigade, into the Iraqi army at the behest of the Ayatollahs, serving the interests of the Ayatollahs. That's how the Iraq War ended. And so, they do not have a good answer for this. Again, Rubio testified to Congress. We don't have anyone to install in power. We do not have a reliable government in exile that we can put in here. So by saying that, he's saying the monarchists cannot accept the power. We have nobody to put in there. Well, then that should be the end of that, right? I mean, we had no excuse in the first place, but now the administration's main hawk admits that he has no plan to see the war through. So that should just be the end of that,
Yeah. Do you think Trump has realized that he was wrong in terminating the nuclear treaty that America had with Iran? Because they're trying to renegotiate that. No?
Nah, he doesn't seem to be one for much introspection. You know what I mean? Even if he screwed something up, well, we just got to figure out what to do with the consequences of that next. I don't think he spends a lot of time going, oh, yeah, I guess if I hadn't done that, it wouldn't have caused that, which caused that, huh? He just ain't like that,
So given all this war hysteria, I mean, in your opinion, what would be a true, genuine America First policy look like? Just
abolish the empire. Just come home. We don't need a world empire at all. Bring home all the troops from Asia, Europe, and the Middle East, and wish them luck. And tell them, look, don't everybody scramble for nukes. Everybody didn't have to freak out. Right now, Japan is a nuclear weapons threshold state. And they have a rivalry with China next door, which does have nuclear weapons. So if America just withdrew from Japan and withdrew our alliance and said you're on your own, they might break out toward a nuclear weapon. Or maybe not. Maybe the Chinese could offer them enough security guarantees that, listen, Tokyo, we don't want to mess with you guys. We're not going to attack you. So you don't need to militarize up yourselves either. And America could even try to negotiate some reconciliations on the way out. Look, we're coming home from Asia. Let's actually sit down and host a conference between China and Japan and South Korea and make sure everybody understands each other real well and that we don't want to fight. And let's go ahead and get talks underway to reunite Taiwan and China. Because no, we're not going to go to nuclear war to defend Taiwan. And if we're not going to do that, then let's go ahead and abide by our stated policy, which is that we respect the fact that it is one China. Taiwan belongs to China ultimately. And so let's go ahead and negotiate their reuniting peacefully instead of having a war over it, right? And same thing for Europe. Look, we want to come home from Europe. Do we want Poland now to panic that the Germans are coming and the French and the British to arm up because now Germany is going to go back and it's going to be the World War again? Or well, no, actually, how about this? How about y'all stay NATO, but we're going home? But France and Britain and Germany and Poland, you guys create a single European army. And then we strongly urge you to join into a treaty of security partnership with Russia, right? There's no national socialists and there's no international socialists. It's just the plain old nation states of Europe. They can negotiate. They got nothing to fight over, okay? And so this is, we don't have to, my magic wish is just abolish the whole empire and just forget it. But where we have created distortions in the balance of power, like in Europe, for example, where America is the dominant military power in Central Europe, right? If we're going to leave, then yeah, we should be responsible and make sure, like, hey, Germans, French, Poles, y'all aren't going to freak out now. France and Britain already have nukes. So Germany and Poland, y'all don't need your own nukes. You guys have a treaty with France and Britain. You guys are cool. Don't anybody do anything stupid, but we're going home because we can't afford it. We just can't afford to defend Europe forever. It's completely crazy. These are first world nations and we got to pay all their bills for them. It's completely nuts. So we can't afford it. America's $40 trillion in debt. Our society's falling apart. And every day they tell us we have no money for you, but we can take more money from you and give it to foreigners overseas for violent conflict. Unnecessary violent conflict is driving the population crazy over here. It's just, we say America first, and then they say no, everyone else instead. And it's really getting to a boiling point there. So I think it's just the obvious thing, and it's really the greatest tragedy that the American people did not nominate and elect Ron Paul for president back in 2008 and 2012 when they could have, because that was the return to normalcy that we needed. That was abandon the empire and be a constitutional republic. Hard money, free markets, property rights, and peace, and therefore prosperity and a better future for everybody. And the American people, TV told the American Republicans to tell Ron Paul no, and so they did. They nominated John McCain and Mitt Romney in 2008 and 2012, two of the worst people in the entire world. And mostly because they were horrible lying war hawks, and they couldn't stand the guy preaching peace. And they came around to realizing that Dr. Paul was right too late. And unfortunately, we have a couple like him, but seemingly not any with a chance at the presidency. I guess we'll see. But I think Ron Paul's most important lesson really is it doesn't have to be this way. This is just decisions that men made that said, oh, we should do this instead of that. But they were wrong. In fact, they were stupid and horrible. They should have listened to him. And if they had listened to him, and he's old enough, he was around, he was saying all this stuff before the Cold War ever even ended. We should not be doing this. And certainly after the Cold War ended, we can come home now. And certainly before the terror war broke out, we should not be bombing Iraq from bases in Saudi. We're going to cause terrorism against this country. We should stop this now. And then the terror war breaks out and he goes, we should not stay in Afghanistan. We're never going to succeed in building a new country for those people, man. It's not going to work. We should not invade Iraq. They didn't have anything to do with September 11th. This is going to cause nothing but problems, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We should not. We should come home. We should stop now, et cetera, the whole time. He was right the whole time on every single point. The Hawks were wrong about everything. I mean, 8 wars in a row that we should not have done at all. That's quite a record. Maybe it's 9 or 10 or 11, but like even just sticking with this century, what they have done, it's just been a catastrophe. And I think the people do feel that way big time now, even though it's a little bit late to the party, you know what I mean? But it means that, I mean, for example, right now, even with all the hype about it, only 40% of Republicans support attacking Iran. That is a solid 10 points short of half, much less like a super majority. And that's the president's own party. And the Democrats, they're not really good on Iran, but they'll be good on it while he's the one hawking it up. Right. And independents are also very against it. So you have something like a 70% super duper majority of the population is opposed to attacking Iran, which it speaks well of the American people finally, that we're really getting great numbers on these things and consistency, even from the party in power, is from the people of the party power. I don't mean from the party power, from the voters of the party in power, at least, that they are really feeling reluctant about this stuff now. So, for all the good it'll do. But, Donald Trump does have to consider that. He does know that we're against it and he has to at least take that into account on the margin. 400 million Americans' opinion is nothing next to the demands of the Prime Minister of Israel, but it's maybe something, to someone.
I guess you mentioned the debt, $40 trillion. Is the debt plus the interest payments alone every year are 1.8 trillion. Those are just the interest payments, not the principal payments. Imagine what all that money could do for American people: infrastructure, new houses, suburbs, schools, community places. I don't know whether American people realize all that or not. I'm not sure what's going to come after Trump. I'm not sure whatever comes after Trump's going to be good or bad. But it's always been worse and worse and worse, I guess.
I think so. Look, I mean, the sort of centrist liberal market in America is so corrupt that ends up empowering socialists and even fascists and, hardcore economic nationalists and their irrational wars against market economics, right? It ain't free markets, but it's the corruption of government by business is a huge part of the problem here. And then so people's knee jerks, right? And then their reaction to that is, well, I guess you need a political leader who's so powerful that he can break those interests and do the right thing no matter what they try to throw in his way, right? So this is just like, for those not familiar with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, let me introduce you to Emperor Augustus Palpatine, the ruler of the evil galactic empire. You might remember how he took over the galaxy. He said, the president is weak. He's ruled by the bureaucrats, and the bureaucrats are corrupted by big business. And so the chancellor, he can't help us. The chief executive, he can't help us. You know what we need? We need a strong leader that can get in there and get things done, bring us justice. And then, so he ran for chancellor on the Democratic Party ticket and won and became the emperor of the galaxy in the name of, we need a man with police power, with the strength to hold the corporate corrupt interests at bay and do the right thing for the people. Now, that is always totally horrible and stupid and wrong, because the strong man's economics are always going to also be corrupt and also totally in defiance of the laws of supply and demand and the market and the rest. Communism and nationalism are absolute idiot ways to run your economy. No matter who your president is, his 5-year economic plan is sure to be an absolute disaster, right? But when you have the likes of the Bushes and the Clintons and Joe Biden and John McCain, and they are the stewards of the liberal center, and they do nothing but run the country straight into the ground with all this imperialism and all this corruption and all this overspending, then it makes people further to the left and further to the right look like smart critics. And that's really dangerous, you know? And so that's why, you know, in fact, like, what people need to understand is that the opposite of the current system would be a free market economic system, right? If people go, well, if this is capitalism, then I want socialism. But it's like, yeah, but this is totally corrupt capitalism with a completely phony government-run monetary system for starters, right? Much less all of the corporate welfare and the foreign imperialism and all of the rest. So anybody wants to complain about all that stuff, they're right. But you get rid of all that, and what do you got? A free market, right? It's all of the nationalism and the socialism in the system that is kind of where the corruption lies. But you see how it's sort of a self-perpetuating system where they call this free markets and democracy. So what comes next? You know, Bernie Sanders socialism, or worse even, you know?
I guess you're right. I think China has shown the world another way to progress, not through wars, but through trades and technology and innovation. I hope Americans realize that there is another way to be strong as well, not just wars, I guess.
I agree. And China, look, I mean, just right there, it's, as you mentioned, it's the opportunity cost. Not only have we spent 10 or 15 trillion dollars on imperialism this whole time, and that just take 10 or 15 trillion dollars off of the balance sheet there, but all of that could have been capital investment into bigger and better things, into increasing the standard of living for people, improving the distribution of goods and services at lower prices for more people, right? In a real free market, the customer's king, and the customer's been getting completely screwed. And meanwhile, at the same time, the Chi-Coms, with their one-party state and their big red flag, have done more to encourage capitalism and reinvestment in their own country this whole time. And, you know, by the way, there's been a lot of economic pain for a lot of innocent people in all that central planning over there too. They don't really talk about that, but like, the reason they're able to build a train that goes from here to there, no problem, is because there's no restriction on their ability to seize people's property and build a train right through their neighborhood or whatever, where we have eminent domain here, and it's terribly abused, in fact. but nothing like in China, where they just completely bulldoze people out of the way and do whatever infrastructure they want, and nobody's got the right to really complain about it at all. But at the same time, they can direct a lot of their central planning toward very big projects that, some of which have really paid off, like building whole new industrial towns and whole new high-tech hubs and all of that. But again, they have their own opportunity cost too, as far as where that wealth could have gone instead. But yes, it's true. Like you have seen, they don't show us here in America that much, but it is the case that there are multiple small little villages from 20, 30 years ago that are major cities, like major wealthy cities in China now, in a way that like it really makes you wonder. Never even mind, the Cold War since World War II and all that, and never even mind, the Clinton years, all the waste of that era. But just this century, if we had not been engaged in all this idiot militarism in this century, what difference that would have made for this society. Pay down that national debt instead of the interest on the debt costing more than the empire itself every year, right? In other words, every single person that lives in your state, every single person, all y'all's income tax just went to pay interest on the debt to some sovereign bank, some other national government central bank somewhere sitting on some U.S. treasuries. And all year long, you're working and paying a third of your income to these scum. And that's where they take your wealth. You're not even paying for a lug nut on a tire that never even gets attached to a plane to drop a bomb on somebody. Your money is literally just being pissed away on interest. I mean, it's just an absolute outrage. As you said, almost $2 trillion a year just in the interest. Absolutely deprived from the American people. It's a death sentence. I don't know how in the world that any politician with a straight face can act like they can just keep on this way. It's just terrible. And look, I mean, drive around outside. There's bums everywhere, right? And they're not all bums. They're just people who they had a place and they got kicked out, right? They were the bottom rung on the ladder, as they say. And now they're homeless because the economy is in shambles, and it's going to get worse. This is the artificial prosperity before the big crash. So worse times coming.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Scott. Really appreciate your time. I know you're short on time. I hope we can do this sometime again. And
yeah, absolutely.
Again, thanks for taking the time to talk to me. And
happy to do it.
Thanks very much and have a great day. Thanks.
You too.